Midway through the month of April, the Cardinals' young stars are starting to emerge and establish themselves as key parts of this team, both in the present and the future. So we have Ethan Hannaford of KMOX to jump on with us today and talk more about the Cardinals' young stars and the state of the club on this episode of Dealing the Cards. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Dealing the Cards. We're really excited about it. It's weird to be excited about like basically a 500 start, but that's where we're at with the Cardinals right now. And there's a lot of young guys where it's always fun when you've got some prospects coming up, young guys who are producing at a high level. So Andrew and I are excited to have Ethan Hannaford on today to talk more about this. Ethan, will you tell our listeners more about yourself and your role within Cardinals media? And just what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. It's great you guys' content has been fun to watch from a distance in the Cardinals Twitter world. So it's cool to be able to finally get to catch up with you guys and get to talk some Cards baseball. But yeah, so I work for KMOX and both the Cardinals. They're actually technically like separate gigs. I work as a producer at KMOX, a board operator, board operate a lot of the Cardinal games. And then as well as that, mix in with some on-air content on the occasion as well with some of the different shows there. And then for the Cardinals, I work primarily as their radio broadcasting booth associate. So I'm working with John Rooney, Ricky Horton, Mike Claiborne most of the time. It's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. It's, preparing notes, grabbing notes for them, looking for little tidbits of information that might be good for them to share on air, as well as, sometimes it's in-game updating of situations. Ricky loves some of the numbers, the exit velo, the home run distance. Sometimes it's updating on literally who's in the bullpen, who's warming up. That's some more of the specific stuff I'm doing with them, but I'm also working with Chip Carey, Brad Thompson, Jim Hayes, Polo Asensio, Benji Molina, all the Cardinals broadcasters, really whatever they need, anything to make the broadcast more smooth for them. That's kind of what my role is. So that's what I do for the broadcaster specifically. And then in post game, I go down into the clubhouse. I'm grabbing audio. I'm interviewing players. I'm in the manager's chat with Ollie. I'm doing all of that to go into the post game commentary for the Cardinals radio network. So those are kind of the main roles that I have, which each of those two companies, organizations really enjoy. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
a lot of good stuff.
What's it like working in the booth with like John Rooney and Ricky Horton and then just like all these iconic broadcasters that, I mean, it's just really good crew. And so like, what is it like early in your broadcasting career to rub shoulders with those guys?
It has been such a huge blessing. It really is a dream come true to be able there were multiple times I felt like last year at 23 years old where I was like, this is what I'm doing. Like I'm getting to work with these guys every day. So some of those connections I've been able to make has been really cool, but also just these guys are such professionals. They're all so good at what they do. So any opportunity that I can, I'm trying to pick their brains. I'm listening in. I'm listening for the way that they're calling specific things or things that they're looking for within the broadcast. So there's so many different parts to a broadcast. If you spoke with, Ricky or some of these guys, they would probably just say, well, there's a lot of prep before, but once the game gets going, you're just watching the game and you're just discussing. But in the behind the scenes, there really is so much that they are looking for, and also using a lot of their prior knowledge on the game and just what they've collected from years of broadcasting. So being able to pick their brains as much as I possibly can, and being able to be also a part of that, to be able to see there's nothing better than knowing that like some of the stuff that you're providing them or helping them out with, that they're actively using that, and be able to say that, man, like I have an active part in what they're doing on the Cardinals broadcast right now. That's pretty cool. So it's been very meaningful. It's been an absolute blessing to work with both KMOX and the Cardinals up to this point, and just looking to continue working my way up through the rankings.
Yeah. What do you feel like is the thing you've been most surprised by, like that you didn't expect from the role, or I don't know. Yeah. Just however you want to interpret that. What's the thing that surprised you the most as you entered into the booth or into the clubhouse in those circles?
Yeah, I think the thing I would say that's been the most surprising is I definitely still have moments where I just pause at times and I'm just like, wow, this is pretty crazy, or like, wow, I'm standing right next to Nolan Arenado, or I'm interviewing
Yeah.
Paul Goldschmidt. So those moments can be pretty crazy at times. They were, especially when I first started doing that role within the
Yeah.
clubhouse, and my first opening day last year working with the team, speaking with the broadcasters, working with the broadcasters, definitely was a lot of that early, like, wow, this is what I'm doing right now. As it has gone on, I think the thing that's been the most surprising is that now, while it is still super cool, the more you do it, the more it just
Mm,
becomes routine. And it's not necessarily last year. It felt like the first month of the year, at least, that I was working within the clubhouse, was like, oh my gosh, I'm in the Cardinals clubhouse. I'm speaking with Oliver Marmol. I'm speaking with
yeah.
Miscellaneous. And the more you do it, the more it just becomes the job. And it's still super cool. But I think that some of that, just that stargazed effect, kind of goes away because you're doing a job. That's, at the end of the day, you're participating in with the rest of the media, and the goal is for good content to be going over the airwaves for the Cardinals radio network and KMOX, and that becomes more of the priority rather than, wow, like, I'm in here. So I would say
Yeah.
there's been a lot of surprising things. I mean, the different people that have walked into the booth or that I've been able to meet the past year is pretty much countless. I mean, I have met a lot of really cool people within the sport, from Albert Pujols to Bob Costas. So those are also really cool to be able to meet a lot of talented people within baseball and broadcasting. But I would say probably those two things are some of the biggest surprises.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you have a podcast yourself where you talk about the Cardinals and a lot of other things related to St. Louis sports. Can you tell our viewers more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so me and a couple of my buddies, my Lindenwood broadcasting buddies, I graduated from Lindenwood in the spring of 2023. We have a podcast called The Loose Sports Talk, where, as you said, Andrew, it's primarily St. Louis sports talk, whether it be Cardinals and Blues. We're starting to mix in some city as well. We've had some great guests on, from Chip Carey, one of our last episodes. Actually, our last episode, Chip Carey and Brad Thompson were able to join us. But we've, as you guys have had on, Katie Wu, have had some plenty of excellent guests within Cardinals media, broadcasting writers on, just trying to, as you guys are, put as much information out there for listeners, for fans to be able to understand what's going on with the teams, what the takeaways are, breaking down some of those things. So primarily St. Louis Sports Talk. We mix in a little bit of national on the occasion in some mini episodes, but yeah, mostly Cardinals and Blues is what we hit. And yeah, our social media is at Loose Sports Talk _. So be sure to go and give us some follows on our social medias as well. But yeah, in a lot of ways similar to what you guys are doing, just trying to share as much information as you
Yeah.
can about what's going on with the teams in St. Louis.
Yeah, definitely go check out the Loose Sports Talk. I've gotten some episodes here and there, and it's good stuff. So really appreciate that, Ethan. I know people are clamoring to talk more about the Cardinals, but one more question I want to ask about you. What are some of your, what's 5-10 years down the line? What is it that you're hoping to do within the media industry? What are some goals and aspirations you have?
Yeah, so I graduated with a degree in broadcasting. So the dream is to get into play-by-play. I'm also, very okay with whatever direction ends up going. I would love to end up being, within media. I've always said at a big stadium, you're at a big stadium, you're probably doing something right. So that is the hope. But like I said, the dream specifically is eventually broadcasting for a professional sports team at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into the Cardinals chat. So
Let's do it.
obviously the tagline today for this episode, what we really want to hone in on, because we've talked about bits and pieces already, is the young position player core, especially, that's coming up right now. I think Ivan Herrera, Andrew and I have very different opinions of what they should be doing with him or how they should be viewing him right now. We'd love to get your take on it. But what have you made of Ivan Herrera's rise this year specifically? And has he changed your opinion about who he is long term for this club?
Yeah, so I think that, great question, by the way. I mean, and the thing with Ivan Herrera that we've seen these last couple of years, in my opinion, is a guy that has gotten bits and pieces and tastes of the majors. And I think we've seen how at times throughout that, how he wasn't ready at different points. We started 2 years ago. It was very clear he was not ready to be taking at bats at the major league level. Last year, we started to see a little bit of it at the end of the year, and that really is what led into this opportunity this year. And you can see the progressions that he has taken in both his offensive and his defensive approach. I think St. Louis has always known that he was going to be the guy, but I think that when Yachty was at the end of his career and when Yachty was wrapping things up, I think there was this kind of like the pressure that was put on Wilson Contreras last year. There was this Ivan Herrera has to be ready to go. Like Andrew, we can't have Andrew Kisner starting. I mean, there was a lot of frustration about why is Ivan Herrera not up with the club. Everything the club does for a reason, whether you agree with it or not. And there's things that I disagree with, but everything they're doing is for a reason. And as far as Ivan Herrera specifically, to what we've seen out of him this year, we've seen a guy that's just grown comfortable with major league pitching with time and experience, getting to see it more. The more you see it, the more adjustments that you're able to make. And the thing I think that I've been most excited about this year is the power that we've seen from him. And I think that when the Cardinals signed Wilson Contreras, at least how I viewed it was, well, this is a guy that we have for 5 years, but this isn't a guy that's going to be the starting catcher 130 games, 140 games for the next 5 years. At his age, with how difficult the catcher position is, there's no way in my eyes that he's going to be able to stay that role consistently. You have to imagine that as the seasons go on, the amount of games that he's DHing is probably going to go up a little bit. Now, I will say this, he's made some great defensive improvements in this offseason. I think that he has improved significantly in some areas, but I think that especially now with you see what Herrera is doing, what that's doing for the Cardinals is building comfort knowing that if at some point Contreras, it basically doesn't feel like you're forcing your hand to where like you have to start Contreras in more games at catcher when you have a guy like Herrera that has the ability to play the position well from both the defensive and offensive standpoint. It takes pressure off the club in my eyes.
Yeah, I think Ivan Herrera should be playing every day. I've made that pretty clear. He seems like somebody that the more plate appearances you give him, the better he's gonna play, right? Like he hit his first home run on opening day in St. Louis last week against the Marlins, and that was really exciting, and really want to see more from that. And we have like when Contreras, after he got in the hand, Herrera was catching every day. Contreras is a DH. Like that was a great lineup with both of them in it, and I think the lineup needs both of them in it, honestly. And one thing that I've considered because this past week, we've seen with Lars Nootbaar coming back, Herrera sat the first 2 games of the series against the Diamondbacks, and I was kind of disappointed. I feel like he should get more playing time, whether that be sending Victor Scott down or just finding a way to squeeze him in the lineup because I feel like he's earned those plate appearances. But do you think there's any way that the Cardinals look at Herrera as a trade chip? Because he could be the everyday catcher for another team instead of being like kind of in a timeshare between him and Contreras. And kind of like what the Braves had a couple years ago with William Contreras, who they had as their DH. Do you think there could be a bit of a logjam with Herrera, or they like try to move some piece to either get him more playing time, or they look to move him?
Well, I think that there could definitely be the potential for a logjam. I definitely do see that because I mean the reality is that Wilson Contreras is on a 5-year, $87.5 million deal right now, and he's going to be your catcher or he's going to be your main guy behind the plate at least for the next couple of years, and he's going to be one of the main pieces in your lineup until that contract concludes. So that isn't in question. Do I think that the Cardinals could be using him as a trade chip? Man, it would really surprise me because, like I said, I think that the role is going to slowly increase as the seasons go on. Now, like you said, if he continues to progress the way that he has, then maybe the Cardinals are forced into that hand, and that's something that they're at least looking at options for. But at this point, the reality is we're 2 weeks into the season. Has Ivan Herrera looked very good? He's looked great. But we're 2 weeks into the season. I'm going to need to see more consistency from him in order for that to happen. Now, to your point, Andrew, you said, how do you build consistency? How do you see that? It's from getting more at bats. So I completely understand that point. My question to you would be, if you said finding a way to squeeze him in the lineup, where are you putting Ivan Herrera in the lineup? Who is losing at bats if you're putting him into the lineup?
Right. I mean, I think that's a really important question. Josh and Caleb talked about it last week, about Victor Scott potentially being sent down and having Lars Nootbaar in center field, Brendan Donovan in left field, and then Herrera, Contreras splitting time at DH. I've also heard that Herrera's emergence could be a reason that the Cardinals don't bring back Paul Goldschmidt this offseason, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. But like Contreras, I feel like could be a solid first baseman, and it could be a way that like they kind of work in Donovan and Contreras at first base, and then Herrera and Contreras catch kind of half the time, and there's a way that works out for them. But I don't know how I feel quite yet about moving on from Paul Goldschmidt. Um, it's just really hard, and it's gonna hopefully be a question that we have, right? Like you want to have more options. I hope we're still asking this question later down the line. I just don't want to see Herrera like lose out on those plate appearances because for young guys like him, it's really important to get him in the lineup every day instead of being a bench bat. Like you see, Alec Burleson has been a decent hitter ever since he came up, but like his numbers pinch hitting are just horrible because when he doesn't get those reps and he just like is forced into a game for like one plate appearances, like he just hasn't really like shown the readiness to take that on. And like yesterday, I think he hit the ball pretty hard when he pinch hit, but like there's no result to show for it yet again, and that can wear on a young guy. Whereas like if you have more of like a veteran backup catcher, like we did with Kisner, or like even bringing in someone externally. I feel like that would be better than just having Herrera play once every 3 days. I just would like to see him more, and if that means sacrificing defense in center, if that means maybe squeezing Donovan out of the lineup occasionally, but like I don't want to squeeze anybody out of the lineup right now, right?
No.
Like Donovan is playing so well, that like it's just a hard decision.
Ethan, I wonder, whoa, words are hard today. What is happening? A way that I framed it to Andrew the other day that I wonder if this would make sense to you or you can see them going this way is I don't think it has to be Victor Scott gets sent down and that's the only way Ivan Herrera can get more playing time. I'm curious if I know they've at least said, and it seems like they're not necessarily wanting to put Nootbaar in center at all. But could there be a world, especially with Ivan's bat playing so well right now, where depending on the ballpark, so like if there's a lot of space in center field, maybe you want to go Victor Scott. But if there's not as much space to cover, maybe that's an opportunity to get to get Lars Nootbaar in center field, Brendan Donovan left, to get Ivan Herrera DH appearance. Maybe if you have like Sonny Gray on the mound and you're not as worried about the fly balls and ground balls getting out there, maybe you trust that you can take a little bit off the defense that day. Is there a world where maybe Nootbaar plays center field 2 times a week potentially, and that gives Herrera maybe 1 or 2 extra starts he doesn't get right there, and then he gets another start at catcher. So he's not necessarily an everyday guy, but now Victor Scott doesn't have to play every single day either. Could the Cardinals lean maybe somewhat in that kind of direction? Because obviously, like you said, we're 2 weeks into the year, so like Ivan Herrera could go 0 for 20 his next few plate appearances, and everyone's like, okay, that was a flash in the pan. Or July could come, and it's clear that he's a guy that needs to be in there every day. So the Cardinals don't need to make drastic decisions right now, but could they get creative with how they use the lineup to get him some more opportunities while he's hot?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we're probably going to see Victor Scott consistently in center field for at least a handful more games because I think right now, like what their mindset with him is that it's just too small of a sample size to know what is if he needs to be sent back down.
Yeah.
Because right now they've really made it clear that the only guys that they feel comfortable playing center field right now are Michael Ciani and Victor Scott. And
Yeah.
we know that because Lars Nootbaar did not play center field in any of his rehab starts in Memphis. So we know that that has kind of been made clear through that. I think it really just depends on how desperate you have to get with this offense, with the struggles of Victor Scott. And let's be real. If Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt are having success at the plate right now, nobody is talking about some of these other offensive concerns because when your main guys are pulling their weight, then the roles of everyone else lessens back to what their roles were before. So if Goldie and Arenado are able to start figuring things out, then we're probably not talking about Ivan Herrera having to get into the lineup every single day. Because the reason for it, I know, Andrew, you mentioned for his development. The reason that I would say that the majority of St. Louis has been saying it is because we need offense and we need to score runs. And he's been our best bat to start the year. So I think it's more so that than everything. So if you can get your main guys going, and we've seen Arenado and Goldie, they've started to figure things out a little bit in this Arizona series. They've hit well there historically. So hopefully it's not just them hitting well in a place they've historically hit well. Hopefully things are starting to actually get going for them.
Yeah.
But if they're able to really start getting things going, then you really don't have to, I think, start asking these questions about, well, do you need Lars Nootbaar to be playing in center field? Because, or do you need, Ivan Herrera to be in there, 2 out of every 3 days, or whatever the ratio you said, Andrew, whatever that number was. Like, I think that if everything else falls into piece from your top 3 bats, your top 2 bats, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to say, then the pressure on where everyone else is playing and the amount of playing time that your young guys that you weren't necessarily expecting to get all the at-bats in the world, Ivan Herrera in this case, or Alec Burleson, a guy that's hit pretty well, is starting to get into a routine. But then now he's going to, because Nootbaar's back, he's definitely not going to get nearly as many opportunities as he was before. So at the end of the day, if the roles of the guys that you're paying the big bucks to, Arenado, Contreras, Gorman, Goldschmidt, if those guys are doing what they're supposed to do, I don't think you're going to end up even needing to ask the question, does Lars Nootbaar need to play in center so Ivan Herrera can get a few more at-bats per week? That's my personal opinion on that. Now, it's a whole different thing if this struggles from your big bats continue, because you have to find offense. You have to figure out a way to win some of these games. And your offense was kind of the piece that you were relying on going into the year, saying, yeah, they're going to carry. So a lot of that is we'll have to wait and see.
For sure. We'll get more into the big bats conversation a little bit. But one of the guys that, oddly enough, I did not think I was going to feel confident at the plate as much as I do right now when he steps up is Masyn Winn. He just looks night and day different than he did last year. And that's something he and the Cardinals have talked about, that pretty much every level he's gone to, he's struggled to start, but about a month or 2 of experience, he hits the ground running and just really becomes the kind of player that they've seen the potential in. What are the things you've seen from Masyn this year that have impressed you? And do you think, obviously he's hitting at a very high level right now, do you think that's sustainable? Do you expect it to come down to earth a little bit? What are your thoughts really on Masyn Winn's emergence so far?
Well, if you're asking me if I think he's going to hit 349 all season long, no, I do not.
Yeah,
I do not think that. I do not think that. But I do think that what we've seen from Masyn Winn so far is closer to what his average out is going to be than what we saw last year.
Yeah.
And that being a guy that can hit to all fields, a guy that is going to suck up everything like a vacuum at shortstop, because that's what he does. He's going to be able to get you a few extra outs on turning some double plays or making some tough plays because he has a wicked arm. The biggest thing that I have seen from Masyn Winn is kind of like what you said. It's been the track record of everything we've seen at every single level. He looks comfortable at the plate. Last year we saw him fall, at least to me. This is something I've seen, and actually we had Kevin Wheeler, KMOX sports personality, on a few episodes ago, and he talked about this as well. Last year we saw him not able to catch up to the big league fastball, and that is something that we've seen him do much better at this year. He's been, at least to what I've seen, more aggressive on some of those early pitch counts to where he's able to get on base in that way. I loved the triple that we saw a couple of nights ago in Arizona. I believe it was a fastball on the outside corner. It's not like it was a bad pitch thrown, and he just took it to right field, right down the line. I mean, like, that is, when I think of Masyn Winn, that is what I think about. A guy that's he's not going to overpower you, but he's going to find different ways to get on base. He's going to take the ball to all fields, and he's going to be able to use his speed to a little bit of an advantage as well.
Yeah, one thing I'm a little bit concerned about is why Masyn Winn seems to just be benched every 3 days for Brandon Crawford. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Every time I see the lineup, like the first time it was like, oh, he has good numbers against so and so starter. I think it was Joe Musgrove.
Musgrove, I
And it
think,
was
was
okay.
the second time, that they benched him.
But I don't get it. Like, Brandon Crawford defensively has won several Gold Gloves, and there go my lights. That's fun. But he clearly
Every
is
time.
not that same guy that he used to be, right? He's not been hitting well. Like, his at bats don't look all that competitive. And Masyn Winn is 21, 22 years old, and he honestly doesn't really need the rest, right? Like, you can sit your veterans occasionally because they're probably at more risk for injury, but I feel like Masyn Winn should not be sitting every third day. is there any like reason for that? Like, do they think that'll make him play better on the days that he like will start, or are they just trying to get Brandon Crawford more reps for some reason? And like, it's just kind of confusing to me, honestly.
I don't think it's about Brandon Crawford getting reps, and they made that very clear to Crawford and to the media when he was signed. This is about this is Masyn Winn's job, and Brandon Crawford is going to have the role of defensive wizard, veteran shortstop that's going to be able to provide some wisdom to a guy like Winn, a young guy. That was the reason for that signing. And I guess they have 1,000 lefty bats off the bench, so that probably wasn't one of the main things. That was the main reason for that. I know that those first couple of times, I'll agree with you, Andrews. I mean, like, let's not freak out, like him starting 2 out of every 3 games, or 4 out of every 5 games, whatever it's been, because it seemed like the fan base, even on those first couple of times that Crawford started, absolutely flipped out. I'm like, guys, come on, chill. We're 10 games into the season. He's sat 2 games. But I will agree, the longer that this has gone on, I think this is series number 5. Has he sat out a game in every single series?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't personally necessarily understand it either at this point, if it's a trend that continues. I know that Ollie was asked about it a couple of series ago, and I don't have an exact quote off the top of my head, but it was along the lines of, like, for the sake of his development. I don't remember the exact quote, and I don't want to give something that is way off beat, but it was something along the lines of that, to where they're just trying to be careful with his development and how much they're using him, the overuse. I mean, that is one thing that, we talked about, like I talked about with Jordan Walker last year, was like the MLB season is a different beast compared to anything you find in the minors. And perhaps it's just that they're trying to keep him fresh because they don't want the dog days of August to catch up to him. They're trying to maybe they're trying to balance things out rather than you see a huge drop off from Winn in August. I'm just spitballing here for reasons that it could potentially be, because as I said, everything the club does, they do for a reason, and they have reasoning for it. They're not just going out and saying, oh, well, Brandon Crawford's the future of our club, so we're going to start him 1 out of every 3 games, or we think we have a better chance with him. I really don't think it's that. I'm not entirely sure. And if it's something that continues, then that, I'm sure, will continue to probably become more of an interesting thing in St. Louis media. But I think because it's so early, not too many in the media are thinking too much into it.
Yeah, I think an interesting parallel that I haven't heard anyone draw yet is they kind of did this with Nolan Gorman last year, where obviously his rookie year he came up, struggled a little bit, came up, but then they wouldn't start him against lefties, even though he was having success against them. People are like, why isn't he starting every day against lefties? He should be an everyday player. And it kind of seems like they were trying to be like, hey, we want to make sure that he's ready for this everyday grind before we fully put him into it, rather than, like you said, start him every single day. August comes around, he hits a huge slump, and then when you're getting ready for a stretch run, your guys you've been relying on all year just don't have the gas in them anymore. So I remember that Ollie quote too, about something about it, to the effect of, to not to misquote him too much, but like the physical and mental grind of the season. And Jeff Jones just actually put out a tweet, and it was definitely his own opinion, but he was like, hey, maybe the fact that Winn sits every couple of days is helping him be successful. Maybe they should do that with Victor Scott now too, is maybe get him an off day every series. So maybe there's some method behind the madness there, where in our heads, we think the young guys can deal with it every time. But like, to your point, it's a totally different animal than Memphis, Springfield, Palm Beach. Like, this is a different grind to it. And let alone the physical grind, but the mental grind too, where down there they can, like, failure is just about their personal development. If like Victor Scott on that Sunday game, when he makes that error, that effectively costs them the game. Obviously the team could have picked him up in other ways, but the results on the field now really matter. And so maybe the fact that Winn's getting a couple off days every week is helping him continue to produce at a high level. Who knows? Yeah, what we've seen is that it already early in the season for some of these young guys, it is an unforgiving sport, something that Andrew clearly, we saw yesterday, a little bit more of a forgiving sport for you yesterday. Were DFA'd and then you were like reactivated. Very quick movement. I mean, it was a lot to keep up with on the Twitter side. All the St. Louis podcasts passed on picking him up, so we just brought him back on the 40-man roster. So, just kidding, Andrew.
Having my Adolis Garcia run, everyone passed on me, but now I'm going to break out. So,
What are your thoughts on that, Andrew? Do you agree with like the discussion about the Masyn, like the development, or do you understand that? Are you still just like where do you sit on that?
I can understand that they don't want to like play him every day. What I don't understand is why like there were big spots where Brandon Crawford was up in like the ninth inning and they don't pinch hit Masyn Winn right there, right? Like that's a huge opportunity. And like it's kind of lazy to me that they're just like playing the matchups because of the righty on the mound. It's like Brandon Crawford last year had like a 30 something OPS. I don't know. I'm exaggerating maybe, but like
Wasn't
he was
pretty.
just
It wasn't
horrible as
pretty.
a hitter.
Yeah.
And like so was Masyn Winn last year, right? But like Masyn Winn is an up and coming prospect who's on the rise, and Brandon Crawford is an aging veteran who's probably not going to have any good seasons left in him. Like right, like he's not going to be Albert Pujols because he has no connection to the city, right? He's not going to find a new gear and suddenly become really good. Like I just don't. I don't think it's a smart decision to just be like, oh yeah, we scheduled this off day for Masyn Winn. The game's on the line. Here you go, Brandon Crawford. Have at it. Like that seems like you need to be trying to win the games. And one at bat for Masyn Winn in the middle of the game is not going to ruin his development. It's not going to make him drained, and he's not going to slump in August because of it. Just let him have the at bat.
I'm curious if we've. This is a stat I am unaware of. I'm curious. Has he pinch hit in any of those games? Or I know he entered in one of them in the ninth on the homestand, but outside of that, I'm curious if he has played in any of those games that he has sat, because I'm not sure off the top of my head.
I think
There
that
was a
the
game
day
against
where he
the
entered,
Padres. I
did he
believe
come in?
Crawford drew a walk, and Wynn was the pinch runner. But I was like, why didn't
Oh,
you
yeah.
just let Wynn take the at bat, right? Like,
It was the last game of that
yeah,
series, yes, because it was late in the
Yeah.
game, I believe. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But I don't think he's come in as a defensive substitute or to pinch hit until that last ninth inning game the other day, which that kind of surprises me. Where there was one of those games in I don't know if it was the Dodgers or the Padres series. There was a ball where Brandon Crawford didn't
yeah,
get
it was
to it
the
late in the game. I
Dodgers.
think it's the Dodgers one.
It
And
was
I'm
the
like,
game that went to
I think
extras, and I was
Masyn Winn
like,
gets to that.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
it was like a 68-mile-an-hour ground ball off the bat, and Crawford just let it go
Speedster.
past him. I was like, cool,
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh, well. Well, let's we've lingered on this for a little bit, so let's get some quick hitters. Your thoughts real quick. So VS2, are you still supporting him as the everyday center fielder right now, or is this something where you're worried about the development potentially and you think it might benefit from a stint in Memphis soon?
After I tell you what, before that first game in Arizona, I was starting to get a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
And then he put
Yeah.
together a couple more good at bats, because what we saw in the first couple of weeks, we're still in the first couple of weeks. What we saw in the first couple of series was he was putting pretty good contact on the ball, enough to where, and he was still finding ways to get on base to where he was still having an effect in the game. I remember those first two series. There were multiple occasions, and you guys can correct me if you disagree, but there were multiple situations where, yeah, the batting average was still at 100, but he was getting on base enough to where you could feel the impact he was still having on games, whether it was with his speed, whether it was
Yeah.
with his defense. And that, once we hit the first homestand, seemed like, to me at least, it kind of went away. It wasn't there
Yeah.
as much. Now, it's a 6-game stretch. It's still only been 2 weeks, but it's, to me, before that first game against Arizona, it seemed like he just seemed really uncomfortable to play, a little bit lost at the plate.
Mhm.
Like I said, it's still early. We're still only, 15 games in.
Yeah.
I would say that if you mirrored what we saw in the first 2 weeks from him into the next two, I think you're probably much more likely to be really close to like, yeah, it's time to get a rehab stint going. Because I think the thing we can all agree on is that there's, even from the plate, there is way more potential than what he has shown.
Oh, for
We want to
sure.
make sure that he is able to put together the best at-bats that he possibly can. Now, obviously, they've been put in a tough place because of the injuries of Dylan Carlson, Tommy Edman, Lars Nootbaar. So hopefully things can turn in the right direction for him. I think that you're still safe probably for at least a handful of games. But beyond that point, if it continues to look just completely lost at the plate, it wouldn't surprise me at some point if they started at least, asking the question, is playing Lars Nootbaar in center a realistic option?
Yeah. And then Jordan Walker, I feel like like Arizona series again, I feel like he's been heating up a little bit, but there's been concerns about his bat. I think he's almost 60% ground ball rate again, which is what he was at the end of April last year when they sent him down. So it just seems like for some reason he just hasn't figured out how to consistently lift the ball, but he did at the end of last year. And I think the day Masyn Winn got called up to the very end of the year, he had like 138 WRC plus the rest of the year. So he was like figuring it out. And now it just kind of feels like some of those bad habits are going around. Obviously, Eduardo Perez said something on the ESPN broadcast about his hip, and so people pointed that out. Are you all concerned about Walker right now at the plate, or do you think he'll be fine in the next few weeks?
It's a good question because Jordan Walker is one that you're like, we saw it last year.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look anything like what it did in the last 2 months of last year or the last month, whatever it was, where he just really went on a tear. And it's like, yeah, this is the guy that we expect to be contributing in the lineup every single day. It's another tough one because you're in that situation where Jordan Walker recently has looked a little bit lost at the plate in that sense of it looks like he's trying to force the ball in the air and it's just not working out. But it's also really weird because if you look at his average exit velo, it's in the 90th percentile in baseball right now. So it's really weird. But then you look at his base hit spray chart and half of them are infield singles to third base. So it's a really weird mix with here if you're just looking at the numbers. If you're looking at him at the plate specifically, doesn't look super comfortable. I think it's probably pretty similar to Victor Scott. Maybe there's a little bit of a longer leash because of what we saw last year from Jordan Walker. Probably is a little bit of a longer leash, but would it be the craziest thing in the world for them to send Jordan Walker down to get something corrected quickly and he's down there for a week or 2 weeks and then you bring him back up, especially with, you talk about finding time for Ivan Herrera to play. If the struggles continue for Walker for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, it might be a question to be asking. So
yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, another point about Cardinals outfielders that maybe aren't with the team anymore. Wanted to pivot a little bit more and talk about the success that some of our former Cardinals are having around the
my
league.
favorite
Tyler
subject.
O'Neill, he homered again today, and Jordan Hicks
Did he really?
has been really good.
Yeah, it was a bomb over the Green Monster.
So he's at 7 now?
Yeah, 7.
Is he still in the lead for home runs? I don't know.
There's no way anyone else is at 7, right? Already?
There's no way.
So is there just like some concern that you have with the development of our young guys? Because it looks like Walker, people are overreacting with Walker. They're like, I've gotten so many comments. They're like, Walker's going to turn into Adolis Garcia or whatever. It's like, no, he's not, but it's fine. Like, is there any concern there, or is just noise?
I have to remind myself that the term fan is short for fanatic. And like, this is what they're supposed to do. They're fans, I love you all. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have the crazy, like, oh my gosh, is this what's going to happen? And I think it's, some of our job with the media to be like, hey guys, calm down. It's all going to be okay. We've played 15 games in a 162 game season.
Yeah.
I think it's way too early to be freaking out about the development of Jordan Walker. One, because we saw it last year. It's not like things are going to be drastically changing. I mean, if there's something that's working, you build off of it. And what we've seen, even from guys like Paul Goldschmidt, who, when you look at his numbers, traditionally in April, they're not great. So like some guys, it just takes a little while to figure it out too. Maybe that's the situation with Walker. We haven't really seen this. He's still so young in his career that, maybe it's that's going to be a thing for him too. As far as Tyler O'Neill goes, I don't think Tyler O'Neill was ever going to have that level of success in St. Louis. It just seemed like it wasn't going to work out. Like we saw bits and pieces of it, but we also know that there were some issues as well, kind of hidden there, that caused the Cardinals to make it pretty clear that Tyler O'Neill was not going to be with the club this year. Yeah. They also had a pretty clear idea of what they wanted to do with their outfield this upcoming year. And at that point, when you have a guy like O'Neill that's very injury prone, and in the last 2 seasons couldn't really rely on him even when he was healthy, like it makes it really difficult because it limits, that creates a logjam. It limits what your other guys are going to be able to do and perform and what their role is. And talk about the mental grind, what that does for a player. I mean, that was something really common for them last year of like, well, guys were all over the place. Guys didn't have their specific roles, and that ended up affecting the mental grind of things. And that clearly showed on the field. So I'm not concerned about Tyler O'Neill leaving. It doesn't surprise me he's having success somewhere else, especially on that 312-foot Greenfoot monster that's like 80 feet high. But I mean, like you look, I mean, like that seems like the perfect world for Tyler O'Neill there. Like, hit a couple of moonshots into the air and, they make their way over. So I'm glad he's having success. I'm happy he is, but I'm not concerned about the development of the Cardinals players at this point.
Yeah, two quick hitter questions toward the end, and then Ethan, thanks again for hopping on. We really appreciate the time today. This is another development related question, and then we'll finalize with the big bats in the offense. But it feels like the Jordan Hicks situation is the first one in a while where I've been like, okay, maybe there's some smoke to this one where the Cardinals can learn from some mistakes here. The outfielders one, I think you can kind of go to Lane Thomas, you can go to Dallas, you can go to Randy Rosarina, Tyler Neal. I mean, the fact that you can name that many names is probably kind of a problem, but each name is an individual case. The Jordan Hicks one, to me, is the one that's concerning because the one time he got an opportunity to start in St. Louis, he was given a week's notice and then had like a pitch limit each time he went out there. He kind of got a shot, but not really, and it never really worked out. He goes to San Francisco. They bring him in as a starter. People are like, what the heck is this? They do some tweaks to his arsenal. Obviously, it's early, but he looks really good. And so it makes me look at like a Ryan Helsley, and it's like, did they just pigeonhole him into, obviously you want an elite closer, but like you would much rather have an elite starting pitcher. Is this something that the Cardinals might be looking at Jordan Hicks? Like, okay, there's a prospect, I think it's Edwin Nunez, that was a reliever the last few years that they just threw into the Springfield rotation. So maybe that's an example of they're looking at some stuff that guys have, trying to stretch them out a little bit more. But do you have concerns at all about the Jordan Hicks situation and maybe that there's something the Cardinals need to learn from here? Or do you think this is just another example of a guy who just didn't work out here? The Giants figured out something in him, and that's not necessarily a Cardinals issue as much as it is that Jordan Hicks just figured something out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that once again, I'm gonna kind of give the same old boring answer of that we're 3 weeks into the season. So this is a question that I think you have to take way more seriously if we get to the point where we're in June.
Yeah,
June maybe, that where we're like, okay, Jordan Hicks is lighting it up out at the Bay, and he looks really good as a starter. Yes, early on, the velocity is a few ticks down, I believe, on the sinker on the fastballs, and that's had a big effect for him. And I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you look at all these pitcher injuries these days, and you look at dudes just trying to absolutely, like, they're trying to clock it. They're trying to put every single ounce that they have in. And it's crazy to think that Jordan Hicks is still pumping 97, 96,
Wild.
and he's not like giving it at all. So that could be something to keep an eye on. And honestly, I'd be curious if that's something that we see more pitchers start to go in the direction of, just for arm preservation, because and that's something I'm sure that you guys will, if you haven't yet, but maybe you will down the line, have talked about, is like all of these starting pitcher injuries. Starting pitchers are throwing harder than they ever have. So how much of it is to do with that? Is there anything that's to do with the pitch clock actually, like the Players Association is saying? But all that to say, Jordan Hicks and what he's been able to do early in the season, it definitely stings a little bit if you're a Cards fan when you look at what they added in the offseason, which hasn't been bad so far to start the year. In fact, I would say it's exceeded expectations, probably that what the fan base in large part had for it. Doesn't mean it's been out of this world, but it's exceeded. But when you look at that, adding, older guys like Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, compared to a guy in Jordan Hicks that had history here, throws really hard, has really good stuff, just couldn't figure it out as a pitcher. I can see why fans early, at least, are like, that stings a little bit.
Yeah. And to your point, his average sinker velocity is down 5 miles an hour right now. It's sitting at 95 on average, 95, as opposed to 100. And then his four seam is down 2 miles an hour. But he does have more break on them. So I know that's something they've done, is they've adjusted the pitch shape a little bit there too. So something to monitor. But I'm just gonna say, if he's pitching like that in June, I'm gonna be full on the Ryan Helsley should be starting the starting pitcher program next offseason.
Hey, kudos to the Giants. I mean, it feels like they're just constantly binoculars on the Cardinals pitching prospects and like ready to swipe. Kudos to them. They figured something out. So, if that's the case, hopefully the Cardinals can learn and adapt and figure out whatever that issue is.
For sure. So as we round it out, obviously in the theme of this, and we try to say this all the time on the podcast too, is it's early. So it's hard to take to draw full conclusions from things right now. But obviously the offense has been sputtering to start the year. I want to ask the question this way: instead of your concern level or like can Goldie and Arenado figure it out, what do you want to see from the offense over the next week? And at what point in the season, if things continue to sputter this way, is that June? Is that July? Is that May? That you start to think this is a bigger conversation that needs to be opened up of, is this offense not what we thought it could be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that what we have seen from this lineup is the potential for the heart of it to absolutely dominate, because what we've seen is Masyn Winn hit really well at the bottom of the lineup. Jordan Walker's been consistently batting in the 7 spot. So like, and then you have Victor Scott, who, if you can just figure it out, like the guy all he has to do is bat 220, get him on base, and you're going to be fine, right? But what we've seen is with the potential for that bottom of the lineup, and I do think that Walker, if he continues to hit and develop, he's going to climb in the lineup. But even with 8-9, the potential for 8-9, and then you add in 1 being a Lars Nootbaar on-base machine, or Brendan Donovan, who's been on a tear to start the year. You look at the potential that this meat of your lineup in Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Gorman, Nolan Arenado, and Wilson Contreras, the potential that they have for the number of guys that could be on base for them to drive in runs. It has me almost licking my lips, like excited, because you know that they're going to figure it out. You know that, like, even if Nolan Arenado is what he was last year, that's still an above average major league hitter for the most part.
Yeah.
If he hits 27 home runs and 90 RBIs and bats 270, like, is it Nolan Arenado of old? No, but it's still going to be okay. And I'll say that, like, and naturally, like, these older guys at some point are going to start regressing a little bit. By older, I mean Goldie and Arenado, which I mean, that's scary to think that they're old. But the role, as their roles slowly regress, the roles of guys like Nolan Gorman, Jordan Walker will increase. So it's not like it's going to be like, as Goldie and Arenado get older, there's going to be a drop off in the offense. I think it's just going to be a transition of where that offense is coming from. So either way, I'm excited about the potential of this offense, because the question marks we had were about some of those guys more so at the bottom of the lineup than they were like in the heart of it. And because those guys are performing, I think it just shows that this offense has the potential to be absolutely lethal, to be one of the best in the game, to be quite frank. Now, obviously, that's assuming that things go peachy keen for everyone and Nolan Gorman's able to figure it out. Jordan Walker's able to figure it out. If they don't, then we're looking at an entirely different conversation, right? We're looking at, okay, well, your question was like, how long until you're concerned?
Yeah.
The fanatic in me says, like, if we get into May, heart of May, and Nolan Gorman still is not looking like it, or if Jordan Walker still looks lost at the plate, then I'm going to have to start fighting the urge to panic. But I'll say this too. Nolan Gorman, top to bottom last year, it was a pretty good year. But if you go month by month into his splits, it was hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. I mean, the guy, was, you would think was freaking Barry Bonds a couple of the months based off of his numbers. Was just on an absolute tear. And he had a couple of months where he couldn't hit anything. Yeah. So, that's where I have to fight the urge to panic with him, because like maybe that's what he's going to be. He's still young enough to where maybe that's not it, but he might just be a streaky hitter. That might just be what he is. So I think there's still a little bit of time before we have to start panicking. I would say, like, I would have to fight a little bit of panic if we're still significantly struggling this much throughout May. I think that there's very fair grounds once we get late May, early June, if things are really at the struggle this much. But like, you also have to define struggle, because like right now, Paul Goldschmidt's batting 180. Nolan Arenado's OPS was 570 before the home run in the first game against Arizona. So define struggling. I think it's struggling is still viewed as better than what they're doing now. But there's still a long ways to go before they're at what their level is and where you would consider it not struggling. So.
For sure. Yeah, my bold prediction going into this year is that they're going to have the third best lineup in baseball. So not looking great right now. But I mean, you look at that lineup and you like, I can't help but be like, there's so many options. So anyways, I'm still banking on them, but it's hard to go out there on Twitter right now and be optimistic when they're putting up 2 runs most games. So
I feel like I'm on full defense all the time on Twitter right now. It's like, guys, hold the line. Hold the line. We're going to get through it, okay?
Oh my God. I didn't click that, so it tells you who did. Oh gosh. Anyways,
I mean,
wrapping up, but you guys got to tell me, like, what is the significance of the Mose water thing? Because I'm seeing it all over the place, but I just don't get it.
it's just basically anytime I say anything positive about the Cardinals, there are specific people that every time do it, but it's become a thing where it's like, oh, typical St. Louis people carrying Moe's water, and it's like I don't have to agree. Like I would love if John Mosaic would like to send me a paycheck every once in a while for saying good things about him. Like I just like to be realistic, and I feel like he gets crapped on more than he should sometimes. But anyways, I'm about to get accused of carrying Moe's water for that one too. So, but then I'll say something negative, and I'll get an email where it's like, "Hey, could you be more positive?" And it's like, I can't win. Like, anyways, so
Fanatics.
I'm sure fanatics. So, anyways, but we love it. That's what makes Cardinals baseball so awesome. There's some fan bases that will maybe check the standings once a month and be like, oh, my team's cool. And it's like the Cardinal fans hang on every inning, and that's why we love the Cardinals so much. So, Ethan,
have it that way. Yeah.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to have you on again soon sometime. Obviously, go check out his work with at the Lou Sports Talk. They talk Cardinals, but other St. Louis sports and even some other sports stuff at times as well. Are you on what platforms are you on for that?
Yeah, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Lou Sports Talk _.
Great. Yeah, definitely go check that out. Ethan, it was awesome having you on. We'll be back on Wednesday to talk. I think that'll be the closing of the A series. So hopefully that's a little bit, I mean, I guess we still have the series finale against the Diamondbacks today. Gosh, if it goes poorly against the A's, I don't know what Twitter is going to look like. So for love of God, Cardinals, please play well. This has been another episode of the Dealing the Cards podcast, and thanks for joining us.